Хотите узнать, как я получаю с помощью YouTube тройной доход? И как вы можете зарабатывать минимум 100 тысяч рублей в месяц на YouTube продвижении? Если нет, закрывайте это видео. А если да, то смотрите.
Exercises. I say 3-ish because one of them is just a modified version of itself. Before I show you what they are,
Tony Winston here for Jazz Piano College.
Я мужского пола. В смысле, если что. Говорит, так, ух ты. Ура.
Going to answer a viewer question about using fourths in the song Have You Met Miss Jones? And we're talking about kind of left-hand voicings. Start on F. So I used a fourth voicing there. Going to D, you know, you can think D altered, and that's actually a voicing that would work for D altered, because look, you got, what do you got here? That's the flat 13, the flat 9, and the sharp 11. So it's like 3 altered tensions. And then move to this voicing for like the D sharp 9. It's still an altered tension because you have a sharp 9 there. So, like that. Use both those chords for D7. And then you could do the thing for C there. See, that one and that one. So, I mean, if you're looking for the chord, just look to the flat 5, you know, the tritone away from D, and just make that the top note of your fourth voicing. If you know that one, go to that one. It's kind of a McCoy-Tyner type of thing. That's A flat minor 7th, and then that could be like a D flat dominant. There's no 7th in there, so it doesn't really sound like a dominant, but you know, it's got enough of the right notes to sound okay.
The grand piano is a stringed instrument which allows the musician to play multiple keys at a time. In this two-part series, I want to show you how it works. In part 1, we'll go over the different pieces of a piano and what happens when a key is pressed. In part 2, I'll show you what the foot pedals do and how they work. Let's get started with part 1. The grand piano has been around for over 300 years now. You'll find one in just about every concert hall around the globe. Let's start today by looking at the lid. It's propped open to give the full sound of the piano. While no one is playing the piano, it's usually best to close the lid to avoid collecting dust. For the best sound during a performance, the lid is usually open towards the audience. This also lets the crowd see the keys that are being played. I'm going to remove the music stand and the lid so we can get a good look at what's inside. The first thing you'll notice are strings, lots of strings. They are stretched along a cast iron frame which has to be very strong to support the tension. Towards the right, the strings are shorter and thinner to produce higher sounding notes. Towards the left, the strings are longer and thicker to produce lower sounding notes. The different lengths of strings is what gives the grand piano its unique shape. The vibrating of these strings is what makes the sound you hear. This won't happen until a key is pressed. There are 88 keys on a grand piano, 52 white keys and 36 black keys. Each key is actually a long lever which you normally can't see. By pressing a key, there's a chain reaction that happens which causes a hammer to strike the strings. Most of the keys strike 3 strings at a time. For lower notes, they strike 2 strings, and the lowest notes only 1 string. The lower notes don't have as many strings because the strings are thicker, so they produce more sound. The motion of the hammer involves a chain reaction. Let's take a look at just one of the keys. This mechanism is referred to as the piano action. Let's break this down piece by piece. Pressing the key causes action. One of the keys. Hammer involves a chain reaction. Let's take a look at just one of the keys. This mechanism is referred to as the piano action. Let's break this down piece by piece. Pressing the key causes the lever to go up and down, just like a seesaw. This next piece is called the whippen. It's pinned in place at the end, which allows it to rotate. Of course, it's not actually floating. It's attached to a long bar that spans the length of the piano. The repetition lever is pinned to the top of the whippen. The top of the lever hits this screw, causing it to rotate just slightly. There's another bar holding this piece in place. The repetition lever has a hole allowing for another piece to go right through. This piece is called the jack. It is pinned to the right of the whippen. As it goes up, the toe hits this cylinder, causing it to rotate. Once again, another bar holds this in place. Hits this cylinder, causing it to rotate. Once again, another bar holds this in place. Notice at the end of the motion, the jack sticks out a little up here. And finally, we have the hammer. The top of the jack is what gives the hammer the final push. The harder a key is pressed, the harder the hammer hits the strings, which means a louder noise. This also key is pressed, the top of the jack is what gives the hammer the final push. The harder a key is pressed, the harder the hammer hits the strings, which means a louder noise. This also means that if you press the key soft enough, you won't hear any sound. Notice how a key can be pressed repeatedly and the hammer still works. This piece is called the damper. You can see that it actually works. This piece is called the pressed repeatedly and the hammer still works. This piece is called the damper. And the hammer still works. This piece is called the damper. You can see that it actually rests on the strings. Pressing the key causes the damper to rise, which allows the string to vibrate. But as soon as you release the key, the damper comes back down and stops the sound. Okay, now imagine this hammer mechanism 88 times. One thing you'll notice is that the highest notes actually don't have dampers. This is because the sound fades away so quickly that the dampers don't really make a difference. Now you know how the keys work, but there's a lot more to the grand piano. Join me in part 2 and I'll show you what the foot pedals do and how they work on the inside. I'm Jared Owen, thanks for watching. Welcome to part 2 of how does a grand piano work. We've seen what happens when a key is pressed. In this video, I'll show you what the foot pedals do and how they work on the inside. That's coming up. At the bottom of the piano, you'll find the 3 foot pedals. These are used to change the sound of the piano in different ways. The left one is called the una corda pedal, or more commonly known as the soft pedal. The middle one is called the sostenuto pedal, and the right one is called the sustain pedal, also known as the damper pedal. Each pedal is pinned in place. Pressing it down causes the other side to go up, which causes the rods to go up too. You can see that the rods affect several mechanisms that extend inside the piano. Let's go through each pedal to show you what it does and how it works. When the sustain pedal is pressed, you'll continue to hear the sound even after the keys are released. The sound will then stop once you release the pedal. If we look up here, you can see something is happening. Press the sustain pedal, release the sustain pedal. If you remember from part 1 of this video, this part is called the damper. When a key is pressed or released, the damper is raised or lowered just for that one string. Down here is called the damper lift rail. When it is raised, it pushes up all of the dampers. This means you'll continue to hear the sound even after individual keys are released. Let's take a look underneath the piano now. Pressing the sustain pedal causes this rod to go up. The rod pushes this lever up. You can see this spring here keeps it pressed down most of the time. The lever then causes another rod to get pushed up inside the piano. This causes the damper lift rail to rise, which then raises all of the dampers. The sostenuto pedal is similar to the sustain pedal, but it only raises the dampers for keys that are being played at that time. Let me show you. Play some keys, press the sostenuto pedal, and now release the keys. You can see the dampers for these keys are still up. That's why we can still hear the sound. Release the sostenuto pedal, and the dampers go down again. Let's get a good look without the action assembly. This bar here is called the sostenuto bar. If I were to cut it in half, this is what the cross section would look like. When the sostenuto pedal is pressed, it will rotate like this. On each individual damper, there's a tiny piece of felt sticking out. So we play some keys, press the sostenuto pedal, and when we release the keys, the dampers catch on the bar. Let's watch that again. The mechanism is similar to what we've seen before. When the pedal is pressed, it raises this rod which pushes on another lever. This time the lever is pinned in the middle. As this side goes up, the other side comes down, which pulls this rod down from inside the piano. This rod comes down, which rotates the bar and catches the dampers. Pretty neat, huh? The soft pedal, as you might guess, well, it makes the piano softer. When you press it, the whole keyboard is shifted to the right. Let's take a look up here. Normally, the hammer hits all 3 strings. With the damper pedal pressed, the hammers are moved over just enough so they hit only 2 of the strings. This gives each note a softer sound. And now for the mechanism. Pressing the soft pedal raises a rod and another lever. You can see this lever is a bit longer. It has a piece that goes up into the piano. As the lever is lifted, the end is shifted over just slightly. This causes the entire action assembly to move by just a touch. It's just enough so the hammers miss a string. Incredible music can be created by playing the piano keys in combination with the pedals at just the right time. Hey everyone, I'm Jared. I'm the guy that makes these animations. If you learned something about the piano, I would love to hear about it in the comments. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Lights, camera,
action. We're talking about the action. That's a broad swath term for a whole bunch of parts and moving things inside the piano. String, damper head, damper felt, damper guide rail, damper wire, hammer, hammer shank, drop screw,
hammer flange, main action rail, damper stop rail, damper wire block, damper wire screw, sostenuto rod, back check, hammer rest, repetition lever screw, repetition lever, hammer knuckle, repetition lever button, whip and spoon, combination jack spring and repetition lever spring, whipping, jack regulating button, jack regulating screw, let off rail, let off button punching, jack, action bracket, damper lift flange, damper lift rail spring, sostenuto tab or lip, damper level, damper lever key cushion, back check wire, whip and flange, whip and rail, whip and cushion, capstan screw, key button, balance rail key pin, key, damper lift rail, key frame, balance rail bearing, front rail key pin, front rail punching, front rail.
What's happening is you're depressing the key, and what that is directly touching is this capstan and the whipping, moving the jack to then push the hammer knuckle, which then propels the hammer to the string. That's essentially everything that takes place in touching one another to get this to move. But then we get into repetition. And how quickly and how much space do I need to give this key coming back up in order to quickly have the hammer play? So that repetition, there's all sorts of things that goes into every little part here, including like the back check and then how the damper moves as well. All of these things happen the very second you start pushing that key. Everything beyond this is the rest of the piano that you hear. If we're gonna dive into the soundboard, we're gonna dive into strings, we're gonna go into cast iron plates, we're gonna go into rims, ribs, everything. Everything. We want you to engage with us and learn more about music when you engage with us. And so be on the lookout. There's a video series coming. I want to try to explain the best I can of how the piano works. What is a piano? And all those great questions that we want to go through with you, because we know some people out there are asking it. Like, subscribe, hit that bell button. You're going to want to know the next time we post about what's happening inside these cool instruments.
А вы хотите открыть детский учебный центр и зарабатывать от 1 миллиона рублей в месяц личного дохода, продолжая заниматься своими делами? Если нет, пропустите это видео, оно просто заберет ваше время.
Thanks for joining us here today for another video from Howard Piano Industries. Today we're going to be walking through the process of looking to see how a vertical piano action actually works. Here in front of you, you've got a vertical piano action model, and this is going to show you all the different parts and how they work together to create what happens when you press down the key and the hammer strikes the string and it makes the sound of a note. So we're going to show you how all the different parts work so that you can understand.
We arrived at the grand piano, one of the most splendid musical instruments and a marvellous piece of engineering. And I want to start by talking a bit about the grand piano. And here we have an actual piece of the mechanism of a grand piano. The key is here, and you can see that when I press the key, all sorts of interesting things happen. Probably the most obvious thing that happens first is that the damper is lifted from the string so that it can sound freely. And then immediately I let the key go, the damper falls back. And so that stops the sound, unless, of course, we have the so-called loud or sustaining pedal on, in which case all the dampers are lifted up. The second thing that happens, well, not in particular sequence, but the second thing that I want to talk about is this little thing here, which you probably notice catches the key when I hold catches the hammer when I hold the key down. And if we didn't have that, we might get a bounce. You might get sort of 2 or 3 notes instead of 1. So that is a very important piece of the mechanism. Now, all the rest of this, on which there are all kinds of fine adjustments that the tuner and manufacturer and so on have to get right, that's all concerned mainly with enabling the key to repeat notes. If we're playing a very rapid thing like this, it's very difficult to set up a mechanism that will do that and at the same time play only 1 note when you want it. And this is an absolute miracle, I think, of engineering, especially when you think that most of it is made of wood. Well, now, if I just go over to this piano, this, of course, is an upright piano, but the principle is exactly the same. Instead of the strings being horizontal, they're vertical, and the hammers, of course, instead of being thrown upwards, are thrown that way at the strings. And if I just play 1 note, you can hear that it dies away very quickly. But if I hold it down, the damper stays off, and we can keep that note going as long as we like. If I press the sustaining pedal, then we can keep a whole chord going until I take my foot off the pedal. Do that again. And so those are very important features of the instrument. In a grand piano, there are usually, at the top end at any rate, there are 3 strings instead of 2, and instead of 1, I mean. And when you press the soft pedal, so-called, what happens is the whole mechanism moves over a little bit, so that instead of the hammer hitting all 3 strings, it only hits 2 of them, so it's quieter. Well, now, in the, I suppose about 60 or 70 years ago, in the 20s and 30s, that sort of time, there were lots of arguments between the physicists of the day and the musicians. And looking back on it now, it seems quite surprising. What the physicists said was that if you think about piano action, the key is really just throwing the hammer at the key, and And at the moment that the hammer strikes the string, the key is not in contact with it. So the only thing you can vary is the speed, the velocity at which the hammer hits the string. And that, of course, is quite correct. The physicists then went on to argue that you could vary the velocity simply by dropping a brick on the key from various heights. And they argued that that was really all a pianist could do. Well, of course, and they argued that that was really all a pianist could do. Well, of course, the pianists of the day got very angry and said there's a lot more to piano touch than dropping bricks on keys. And of course, they were absolutely right too. So both sides were right. And as is very often the case in these situations, they're not really arguing about the same thing. What the physicists were saying is, if we take this into a lab, we can vary the speed at which the hammer hits the string by dropping bricks on it. Perfectly correct, no problem at all. But as soon as you take that out of the lab into the concert hall, the whole situation is different. And there are all sorts of things that a pianist can do that somebody dropping bricks certainly couldn't do. I'm not going to give you a lot of examples, but just one. If I play a chord, and I try to make all the notes the same loudness. Now I do it again, and this time I'll try and make my little finger go a little faster. Could you hear that top note singing out? This time I'll try to make my thumb go a bit harder. Now, each time I was playing the same notes, but I'm sure you could hear a big difference. Well, that's just one of the things. All the timings and so on and so forth are all a little bit different. And so when we talk about piano touch, it's a very, very complicated thing that we can only really talk about in the concert hall. Incidentally, that's true of many other instruments as well. And some years ago, a student of mine called Mike Rafferty, who happened to be a very good violinist, helped me with an experiment. This is the oscillograph trace of a violin note which we did in the lab. He just played one note. And then we took him into a concert hall with an audience, and he played a piece, I think it was a partita, but it contained exactly the same note that he'd played in the lab, and this was the trace we got. You can probably see that what was happening here is that the note before, because this was in a sequence, the note before was dying away, and then the next note is coming up. So there are at least two things happening. One is that when you play a note in a concert hall, it's not on its own, and the first note has to die away before the next one can start. And secondly, if you look at this, it is in fact a different pattern. So that when he's there in the concert hall with the adrenaline flowing, he's actually producing a different sound. Well, that's a sort of moral, I think. And I'm glad to say that I think physicists are a good deal less arrogant now, and we do tend to cooperate rather more in a more friendly way with our musician colleagues.